Press podcast once again. My name is Gregory Moreland-Toon, and I am going to be the new host of the West Coast Press podcast. This is a new and re-innovated podcast. We have changed things up. We started this podcast over 3 years ago when the company started in 2020. Now we're in 2024. We want to change things up. We're going to change this to 10-minute segments. One will be with Jack Loder, our basketball expert in the Bay Area. One will be with Chris Jackson, our basketball expert in Sacramento. And one will be with our soccer expert, Dylan Grausz, here in the Bay Area as well. Each one will have 10 minutes to just kind of go over what has happened over the last couple weeks. And then we will move on to the next segment. There's trying to cap it at 10 minutes. This one went a little bit longer. We're still in the test trials of what works and how long we need to go for each question. But this is the new West Coast Press podcast. I hope you enjoy it. Thank you. All right, Jack, welcome to the podcast. It's 11:06 a.m. on Tuesday. So if anything crazy happens between now and when this is posted, don't blame me. Blame Jack for not knowing the future. How you doing, Jack?
Good. Thanks for having me on. It's good to be back on the podcast airwaves. Been a little bit. Finished up football season, and now we're full swing for some hoops. Can't wait to talk about it.
Yeah, we really are in full swing. League titles are going to be decided not too long from now. The rankings are definitely in full swing as well, and that's going to be our first topic, is just kind of the gap between some of the top teams in these rankings and the rest of the field. So let's start with the boys and that side, because there's a fun race in the top four or so, and then talk about the difference between them and the rest of the field.
Yeah, the what I've noticed from both games I've seen and games that I've just kind of witnessed going on throughout the Bay Area, is that the teams in this top 4 or 5 range in the boys are a cut above the girls, or excuse me, the rest of the field. So I had the girls' rankings open. They're a cut above the rest of the field, and we saw it with Reardon and St. Ignatius last week. We saw it with Dublin and Ignacio Valley the week before that, and a Berkeley team that really had some good wins under its belt take a tough loss to one of the top teams in the Bay. So these top 5 teams: Salesian, Granada, De La Salle, Branson, and Reardon. And then you get into the Dublin, San Ramon Valley range, where you can say that those teams are putting together impressive wins too, but it's really those top 5 that have put together double-digit wins, 30, 40-point wins against other ranked teams. And so it shows me that the open division is kind of taking shape in that top 5, and that it's kind of a rich get richer scenario, because Branson's not going to lose to Marin County. You know, Midi, Salesian, they might trip up once or twice because they load up the schedule. But for the most part, those teams are going to have, fewer than 4 or 5 losses heading in the postseason. So those top 4 or 5 on the boys' side have been so dominant that it's been eye-opening.
What do you think that has been the main difference between those two teams and the rest of the field? Is there a distinct difference in their play style? What is it about those teams?
It's athleticism, size, and skill, obviously, but it's mostly just the fact that everyone can practice and get better and hone their skills, but there's the athleticism that those teams possess, and the depth of that athleticism has been really impressive. You look at a Branson team, for example, as a Jace Butler, Sumitra Carr, Finley Keefe, Joaquin Aguillon, and you get to like the 4th or 5th best player on their team, and they would easily be the number 1 scoring option on most other really good teams in the Bay Area. So the depth of that athleticism, the ability to run, dunk, play above the rim, and muscle guys inside the paint. I think when you look at those 5 teams, that's why Granada's had a ton of success. They got a lot of size. They can bully people in the paint, dominating the rebounds. It's just a physical domination that can't be remedied by any sort of, nice shooting night or really, really strong defensive effort from a team that's just not as physically dominant.
And then let's move to the girls' side of things, where it really seems like it's Midi and everyone else. It's a story that we've heard before, but just kind of talk about those top teams and what Midi's been doing to separate themselves from the rest of the field.
Well, Midi, as historic as the program has been, you could argue that this start of this year is as historic as any other during Sue Phillips' tenure, because they got that huge win on the non-league. I think it was Christmas, a couple nights before Christmas, maybe, against Long Island Lutheran in that national tournament. That really kind of cemented them as not just the Bay Area's best team, not just Northern California, not just California, but the nation's best team as we head into 2024. So Midi behind Wolochuk, and it's a cast of really strong and really well disciplined players. You can always count on Midi's girls teams to be really well disciplined, but this team, above all else, there's even a huge gap between Midi, who's number one in our rankings right now, San Ramon Valley, who's number two. I would still take Midi by 25-ish points over San Ramon Valley. That's just how good they are, and that program's pedigree speaks for itself. I think they got countless players at some of the top Division I programs in the country, and they're cut above. It's almost reminiscent of De La Salle football's run years ago in the Bay Area, where there's not a true contemporary.
What about everyone else? It seems like number one is locked up, but what is that race for number two looking like with SRV sitting there right now?
Well, there's a really compelling race in the East Bay, and not just the East Bay, but the EBAL. San Ramon Valley is at number two, Carondelet's at number four, and then Acalanes is number three. So those three schools who kind of share a similar neighborhood are really strong in the Bay Area, and have been steamrolling all their Bay Area competition in the non-league slate. Most of those losses, San Ramon Valley's 12-1, Acalanes 11-3, Carondelet's 11-1. Most of those losses are out of area powers. When they play Bay Area teams, they win, and they win convincingly. So these teams have separated themselves. And there's the next cut kind of down from that. You get to the Sacred Heart Cathedral, Cardinal Newman. Cardinal Newman's had a really strong start to the year. We can talk about them a little bit more when I get to the league races segment in a couple minutes here. But those kind of top 10 teams, you got a Bishop O'Dowd and Oakland Tech when you go back into the East Bay, like the Oakland League too. There's a lot more parity there in the 2-9 range than there is in the top spot.
All right, and then we want to go over to the Bay Area success in some of these big area tournaments. We already talked about Midi getting that big win over one of the top teams in the country. Just kind of talk about the success that the Bay Area teams have had in out of area tournaments.
Yeah, we talked about Midi girls getting that win. You had De La Salle going down and beating Los Alamitos. You had Granada beating Bishop Gorman out of Nevada in a tournament that was down in LA. Reardon beat Bishop Gorman as well. And these teams are kind of not putting the Bay Area on the map, because everyone knows that hoops is pretty good in the Bay, but definitely showing that this could be a huge Northern California and Bay Area year in high school basketball. These out of area wins. You have teams even in a more small scale out of area win. You have a couple teams beating St. Mary Stockton. You had Granada beating Sheldon. These Sacramento teams that are really good. Showing that these Bay Area teams kind of have the upper hand on the rest of the state right now, and even some of the SoCal powers. So I think it's important. It's not as important in their league wins and their league standings and their section standings from a practical standpoint, but just from a mental, emotional area superiority standpoint, the Bay Area has been showing out at these national invitationals.
And another thing that you pointed out is how good the defense has been, but scoring starting to catch up. Where do you see the basketball kind of turning into from early on in the season till now?
Yeah, it's kind of like in baseball. Oftentimes you hear about how pitching always starts the season hot and the bats need to catch up. That's what I've noticed in this high school basketball season. A lot of low scoring games. You see totals in the 40s. Sometimes even teams pulling up in the 30s in a lot of these evenly matched games. In a couple of tournaments I went to, even our tournament, the West Coast Preps Winter Classic, I was at the Callan Memorial up in Petaluma. Just a lot of missed shots, even on good looks. So that was something I knew would be, water finds its level and people will rise and regress to the mean. And that's started to happen the last week. We've seen a lot of higher scoring games, especially in the WCAL. You had, Reardon and SI up in the 70s. Teams are starting to hit shots. I think offense is starting to run smoother. Chemistry is starting to really become more of a factor. Teams are introducing players who had to sit out for transfer. Teams are getting people back from injuries, and they're beginning to kind of discover their offensive identity. So I think some of those rock fights and low scoring games we saw early in the season, we'll still see those because there's always going to be intense defensive league play and teams that want to slow the game down. But I think the overall shot making and scoring ability of these teams is something that's going to continue to increase as we head into January and February.
You mentioned some of those league races. What are your favorite ones that you're really looking forward to as we head into league play?
Yeah, I'll start up in like the far North Bay, which leagues in Sonoma County that don't get a ton of basketball love, because when you think of those schools like Cardinal Newman, Windsor, ETC, you think football because they play football up there. You think baseball, they produce a lot of good baseball players. There's good basketball up there too. And I think the North Bay League Oak Division race this year You got a Montgomery team that's really good, really compelling. They started outside of our rankings, but have since worked their way in after a really good showing at the Bambauer Classic at Marin Catholic last week. So a Montgomery team and a Cardinal Newman team on the boys' side that are going to be duking it out all year. Cardinal Newman has a couple really young guys, a freshman and a sophomore who see significant playing time. So as those guys get kind of cultivated into the varsity basketball landscape, I think they're going to be a really compelling team down the stretch. Montgomery's got Caden DeVries, who's probably the best player in Sonoma County that I've seen. A cut above just in terms of athleticism and shot making ability. And their coach Steve Arrow is saying that he's a fourth year varsity guy that has really made big leaps this year. And I alluded to the EBAL girls race out in the East Bay with Carondelet and San Ramon Valley. Those two teams are going to be duking it out. It really is kind of a two-dog fight in there. Cal's a pretty good team. You got other teams that are going to maybe nip at the heels of those two, but those two are going to be absolutely duking it out for that EBAL title and NCS positioning too for the section and state tournaments. And just to touch on the South Bay and the Peninsula a little bit, and the WCal, both the boys and the girls side are going to be awesome races. We've already seen Reardon and Mitty put up big wins on the boys side. St. Ignatius had a huge win over Reardon last week in a game I was at, in which SI scored 5 points in the first quarter and ended up with 57 for the game, which is, a pretty high girls total for sure. So they are a really solid team that knows how to make adjustments in game. So both sides of the WCal race are going to be really compelling. And I'm super excited to see it play out and kind of have a front row seat for it.
Perfect. I love that. Don't get used to this. We're going to let you go over your 10-minute allotment here, only because
I knew I was close.
You were close. You're at 11 minutes, I think, right now. But I believe in your rant. So go ahead and give us your rant about boys and girls.
I'll make it quick because it doesn't need a ton of window dressing. But boys games and girls games should be played on the same night at the same site. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense where like I alluded to being at St. Ignatius last week for the girls game. The boys game was at the same time at Reardon. So pretty sparse gym for the girls game, which really kind of sucked for the girls because one, those are two really good girls teams. And two, they were putting on a really nice show. It was a really dramatic late league game that I think if it had been a 6:00 start at Reardon before the boys game, by the time it's the third, fourth quarter of that girls game, that gym is packed and rocking, and both student sections are supporting the girls teams just as hard as they support the boys teams. So it's I say it selfishly because I'd want to cover both games. It's easy to hit two in one night. You can't really do that when they're at opposite sites, but also just in terms of supporting girls and women's sports. When faced with a choice like that, students are going to gravitate towards the boys game. But if the girls game is before, you get more support for the girls who work so hard to put a good product out there and who are putting out a really good product. I saw it firsthand with that SI Reardon game. So for the WCAL and for all other leagues, I know some leagues do it. Where I grew up in Marin County, they did it that way, and I always loved the environment that the girls got before the boys games. And so if possible, think about maybe not this year, maybe not next year, but down the line, whoever's planning the structure of these type of things, get the girls and boys games on the same night, and even do boys games before girls games if you want to really switch it up, because the girls deserve all the support the boys are getting.
Perfect. Thank you, Jack, very much. Read all of his content on westcoastpreps.com. And until next week, we'll see you then. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
All right, Chris, welcome back to the West Coast Preps podcast. Our next guest is Chris Jackson. We're recording Wednesday at 1:37 p.m. So just like I said to Jack, don't blame me. Blame Chris for not knowing the future if anything crazy happens between now and when this gets posted on Thursday morning.
I don't know anything. I don't know anything. So please don't blame me.
And just like our normal, regularly scheduled West Coast Preps podcast, we're already off the rails. I'm going to keep
the OGs. It's the OGs. That's why.
Chris, I'm going to keep you focused right now.
Thank you.
Who is the number one team in Sacramento for the boys right now, and talk about the rankings?
This is where it kind of goes back and forth. Right now, I've got Rockland, number one in the boys. They're 19-0 overall. I mean, they've gotten some big wins too. The resume is huge. On Friday, they beat Del Oro, who's number 4 in overtime. You've got Mark Lavernov, 1,000-point scorer, junior. Actually just got an Idaho offer. Josiah Andrews is a stud both ways. And then, of course, Reeve Sloan, the D1 football quarterback, a sophomore, hits the game, tying 3 in the game-winning 3 to keep him undefeated. But them and Monterey Trail, I would say it's like this, right? You could make the argument for either one, and I'm not going to argue it because Monterey Trail's 14-1. Its one loss was to an out-of-area team. Both teams have played out of area teams, all that too. So it's just a matter of both have really good resumes. So it's just a matter of who's the 19-0, who's the one loss team. But I could easily see this changing and going between 1 and 2 pretty much every week for the rest of the year. Monterey Trail, though, 14-1. They've got a great team, and actually some fun stuff about them. They've won some huge games too, right? They've beaten Christian Brothers, they beat Sacramento, who I saw last night, and biggest thing about them is Brandon Gibson's their leading scorer, 21.7 points per game, multiple offers. I asked their head coach, Coach Field, just about his team and them being so special and their best team in program history right now. And actually a funny Bay Area connection for you guys is he's good friends with the former Alameda coach, Cameron Quick, who brought them to a state final, I want to say in 2018. He asked Quick earlier in the season, I want to say just about how did you know that was a special team? Well, it's because our best player was our hardest worker, right? And that's the way it is for Monterey Trail. Gibson's the first one and the last one out. And Rockland's at number 1, but Monterey Trail is right there. Right there. And I would love to see these two teams square off at some point, because I think if they play 10 times, it's 5-5.
I'm going to give you 30 seconds to explain why there might be a sleeper team and what that sleeper team is to get into that.
Sleeper team. Great. I love this question too. It's hard to call Sheldon a sleeper team anymore, considering, I mean, they had the losing record early, but all the crazy travel, they schedule tough. Now they're undefeated in the Delta League, but I'm going to go in Sac High. I mean, I saw them last night, huge double overtime win. They're top 10, first place in the Capital Athletic League. Heck, I might be overlooking them in some ways too. I think I may need to move them up in the rankings a little bit after what I saw the other night. But I would say Sac High as a team, please, please, please do not overlook. Athletic, selfless, a lot of different guys that can score. And even if their superstar, Samarius Jones, doesn't score 25 points, they got a whole complement of guys that rally around and get the points and the rebounds and the defense.
Per usual, I give Chris 30 seconds and he goes a minute and a half. Anyways, move on to the girls' rankings and just talk about those rankings and who you got at 1 there.
Folsom is number 1 now this week. It was St. Mary's, previously St. Mary's out of Stockton. This one also is one you could kind of go back and forth. But Folsom 11-3. They've beat number 3 McClatchy, number 4 Oak Ridge. Cameron Mafu is going to Cal, McDonald's All-American Game nominee. And then Ava Rollins come back too. Her brother, people out here might know the name Chase Rollins as a boys basketball star, but St. Mary's is right there. 11-5. Again, the schedule is tough. They beat Akalani's. They've beat number 5 Whitney. They've beaten Cardinal Newman, San Ramon Valley. The one loss, I guess, in the region was to Bishop O'Dowd, who's uber talented. But you've got Jordan Lee, Texas bound, McDonald's All-American Game. And now they've got another McDonald's All-American Game nominee that's eligible too. The transfer from Granada, Cassidy Bartolotto, is going to the McDonald's All-American Game, and she can play now. So that her being in that lineup, it's going to be hard to see anybody beat St. Mary's.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask you the same question, 30 seconds on any sleepers and the girls that can get into that top 2 race.
Probably I would say an Oak Ridge or a Whitney. Actually, no, let's go Colfax. I'm gonna change it. Colfax, they lost to Whitney earlier, but they didn't have their full roster. When Colfax is healthy, that team is smaller school. They are loaded. Great coach. Rex Van Simpton coaches them well. They've got some stars. They went to the state final last year, and this is a team that has not lost since facing Whitney, and I don't see them losing again for at least a month and a half. So I would say Colfax is the team that could sneak up.
Now I want to move on to some enticing league races that you've pointed out to me. Let's start with the girls on this one. What's the girls' race that you're super excited about going into?
I think I got to go to the Mammoth League. It's the Sierra Foothill League. You just look at the rankings. You've got Folsom at 1, Oak Ridge 4, Whitney 5, Delaware 14, Rockland 15. I mean, Folsom's got those multiple D1 players, like I've said. Oak Ridge beat Whitney by 15. They've won 8 of their last 9. They beat Monterey Trail, Rockland, San Domenico. That's got a Stanford commit. Whitney is super selfless team. I mean, Sydney Gatlin runs just a heck of a program. They've played exceptional basketball. They beat Colfax. They just dominated Granite Bay. They've got Harper Peterson, who's a 4 or 5-star prospect going to Stanford. Another All-American Game nominee too. You're kind of getting the trend here, but she scored 33 points last night, 3 shy of the school record, but it's her passing and that selflessness, and that's a team. They're going to be a force, defending section champs, and then Rockland, Del Oro, those are teams that are going to make a lot of noise, and the rankings show that. But I would have to say the SFL right now is that league where that girls race. It doesn't seem like there's a game that you want to miss this season.
And I'm going to put you on the spot. Who are you predicting will win that race this year?
Folsom.
Wow. That's it? Just Folsom? All right. I like it. I like it. That's the way this is supposed to go, fast and quick. Now move on to the boys and the league that you're super excited about following this year.
I'm going to point out too, I promise I'll make this quick, but the Capital Athletic League, we saw it with Sakai and Capital Christian last night, double overtime. Sakai 3-0, Capital Christian 2-1, but they got to play each other again at Capital Christian next time. Christian brothers, they're not at the top right now, but I could easily see them getting there. They dealt with injuries, illness. Now they're fully healthy, and it showed by beating Vista del Lago last night. Rio Americano, always a strong program, well coached, but that race, especially at the top of Sakai and Capital Christian, not going to want to miss that rematch. It is going to be on January 30th, and I can guarantee you I will likely be there. Then the Delta League boys race, 3 teams in the top 10. There's definitely going to be some shuffling now after Sheldon beat Franklin, but Franklin was at 5, Sheldon 7, Jesuit 8, and Sheldon's already beat the premier teams in the league, right? They beat Jesuit last week, really took Jesuit out of its game there, inserted that physicality and athleticism, beat Jesuit, they're 3-0, and they beat Doherty Valley, they beat Clayton Valley, right? So NCS Powers, that won section crowns last year in the Open in D1. They've got that team just that they're superstars. That's all I can say. It's Sheldon basketball, but Jesuit's going to be right there, and they've still got to play Franklin on Friday this week too. But they defeated Oak Ridge, who's number 15, and then Franklin lost to Sheldon. Like I mentioned, they've got to face Jesuit, but they beat a gauntlet of ranked opponents so far, and it's their best start in program history. And they've got a D1 sophomore and Aiden Rollins that everybody needs to check out. So I would say Capital Athletic League, Delta League are the 2 boys races that you're not going to want to miss.
So are you going to be taking Sheldon the favorite in this one, or you see someone else?
I'm going to take Sheldon the favorite, but don't look past Christian. Or I don't know. I'm thinking now I've got Christian Brother from the other league in there, but don't overlook Franklin and Jesuit to make some noise there at the end. But Sheldon's that team. They've already got those biggest wins. They've got the resume to where I'm not picking against that powerhouse.
We did very well on our normal topics. I think we did that in 8 minutes, if my timing is correct. So I got time to ask you, what's been the game of the year so far in Sacramento? Because you've had some wild ones.
Yeah, I've had some wild ones the last 2 games I've been to, right? It just seems like I've gotten spoiled with that. Maybe a good stretch, probably luck, but West Park, Roseville, that Sacramento game of the week presented by National Scouting Report lived up to the billing. It was Roseville's down all game. Brandon Newton comes down, hits the 3 to win it as time expires. Just as soon as he shot it, you just kind of knew that ball was going to go in. West Park had to miss a free throw or 2 to make that happen. They did. Roseville comes down and Newton hits the game winner. So I would say that. And then Tuesday, the double overtime thriller, Sakai, Capital Christian. Sakai just finding a way to win. Tired legs, you could see it, but they just kept getting offensive rebounds down the stretch, which has to show you those gassers, those suicides they run, pays off. When you go hard in practice, you go hard in the game. And I would say Sakai, Capital Christian is another one of the best games I've seen too.
Perfect. That's it for this segment. You can read all of Chris Jackson's stuff on westcoastpreps.com. Go get your subscription so that way you can read all about those crazy games that Chris has been able to cover. Thank you, Chris.
No, thank you. And thank you for dealing with my nonsense for 10 minutes. 10 minutes too long for you and everybody else.
Bye-bye. All right, Dylan, welcome to the West Coast Preps podcast. You are the not least, but the most important. You're the boys and girls soccer expert of the crew this year, and this is now your 10-minute segment on the podcast. So welcome in. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited. It's been a great season so far. I've seen a lot of great matches, a lot of great performances, so I'm just excited to get into it.
Yeah, let's jump right in and let's start going over the rankings. Let's start with the girls' rankings and just kind of how you see that playing out early on in the season.
Well, so obviously we have the top 2 teams at Midi and St. Francis. Those 2 square off tomorrow. And those 2 teams right now are proving to be the top of the class. But a team to really watch out for is Lee. They are undefeated. You know, they just came off of a really big win against Los Gatos on the road, beating them 2-0. That was a rescheduled game from December. But Lee's a team that I think is going to be really fun to watch all season long, and they were the time I saw them. But right now, I think Midi and St. Francis are the 2 teams that are kind of in a class of their own. Both of those teams are incredible. Branson's another team to watch as well. They haven't lost a game yet. They started off the season, I believe, with 5 or 6 straight clean sheets, so they've been really good as well. So, the girls, especially in the top four, there's some really good teams as well. And then kind of moving that down to 5 through 7, we got SRV undefeated 7-0. They are a very good team. Them and Monta Vista are the two teams in that league that are going to probably run the show. And speaking of Monta Vista, they are ranked at 6. They are 4-1-1. The only loss that they've had was in a tournament in the Tri Valley. They lost to Midi, but other than that, they've been very good. They faced Carondelet yesterday. So yeah, Monta Vista is a really good team as well. So the top 6 is definitely going to be are definitely the teams to watch for. And then the last just finishing up the top 10, Berkeley, Carondelet, and Valley Christian. Berkeley and Carondelet both have the same record, but Berkeley's only loss was to Monta Vista in a close game. So yeah, there's a lot of good action in the girls going on right now.
Yeah, and it seems like it's a really deep slate this year.
It is.
You have Mountain View that are kind of seeking or right around there in the teens. You also have Presentation, St. Ignatius that are hovering around. Those are also great teams, as we'll talk about the WCAL here just in a little bit. But move on to the boys' side and just kind of the teams that you're really excited about and how those top teams are doing so far.
So St. Francis is right now at 1. They overtake Berkeley, who suffered their first loss to Bishop O'Dowd. St. Francis is sitting at 9-0. They are a team that is really looking to be the top of the class right now, especially in the WCAL. And then Cardinal Newman is a team that, as good as they are, I didn't expect them to be this high up. They are 11-1. They lost on January 6th to Ukiah. They lost 2-0, but it was the first game back from break. I'm not going to really fault them too much on that. But other than that, they've been amazing. They started off the season 10-0. They hadn't lost a game. They were on fire the entire season, and they still are. Mountain View at 10-1. They had a loss earlier in the year to Caramont. It was a close 3-2 loss at home, but they have been dominant ever since. I saw them play against Sarah, I believe it was last Saturday or 2 Saturdays ago. They were down 2-0 after the first half, but they came back and won. They scored 3 straight goals and won the match. They are a tenacious team. They have a lot of talent on the team. Caleb Toney is a player to watch. He scored in the game I played. He's a very smart player, knows what to do with the ball. And then Bishop O'Dowd, they were ranked 11th. They moved up because they had an upset win over Berkeley, and they are now 6-1-1, and they're looking like a team that is really going to make a run. I haven't seen them yet personally, but what I've heard and what I've gathered is that they are just a dominant team, really looking to make a run and stretch things out. And then I talked about Berkeley; they are 10-1. But let's talk about De La Salle. They were ranked at number 12 before yesterday, but they had an upset win over Monta Vista, which isn't an upset anymore, but it was. They won 1-0, and they're a team that they are hungry. They lost in the finals to NCS last season to Monta Vista, and they came back and they got the revenge. So that's another team that I'm excited about. And then kind of another team that I think needs to be talked about more is Clayton Valley. They are 7-1-2. They are on a tear. They have a lot of skilled players on their team. They're a very tactical team, which makes them a team that's going to be tough to beat down the stretch.
Yeah, and it seems like the same with girls. It seems like up and down. We were talking about today. The outside looking in is impressive already as well, as there's a ton of teams over there with 7-8 wins and just 1 or 2 losses. So once we get into the postseason and start getting towards those NCS and CCS matchups, it's going to be a lot of fun. And then NorCal's as always is a great time as well. But before we get into the NCS and CCS races, we have league races that you really have a keen eye for, and just kind of talk about some of those races that you're excited about.
Yeah, so the first one that jumps to my mind is the WCAL girls, and is going to be a very tough race. St. Francis and Midi are obviously top 2 teams in that division, in that league, that are probably going to fight to the death for the championship. But SI is holding not far behind. They're 1-1. They're 7-2-2 overall. They are a very good team. They have a lot of talent. Valley Christian in Presentation as well. Even though Presentation's 0-2 in league, they are 9-3 overall. They are a great team. They have a lot of talent. But I do think that the WCAL girls is going to come down to St. Francis and Midi as the top 2 teams. Obviously, they play tomorrow, like I said. And I think the winner of that game, while that game probably won't determine the league yet, because there's still a ways to go a little bit, that game will give a clearer picture as to which one of those teams is going to come out on top. And then moving on to the boys' side, kind of the same thing. Midi and St. Francis are the top two teams, but Valley Christian, Sarah. I mean, Sarah had that loss to Mountain View that I talked about, but overall, they've been a pretty good team. They're 5-3-1, 1-1-1 in league. So they're a team that's, under the radar. They're not ranked yet, but if they have a couple good matches, I'm going to put them in there or have them in the outside looking in, because they are a team that should not be overlooked. But I do think that Midi and St. Francis as well in WCAL, those are the top two teams. They're both 3-0 in league, and that they are going to give a run for their money. And now another league I want to talk about before I move on to the MCAL is the Bay Counties, boys and girls, right? Marin Academy and University on the boys side are currently the top two teams. I think that it's going to probably be it's going to be Marin Academy. I think that is going to be the team to beat, but University and Lick Wilmerding are not far behind. They both have proven that they can beat good teams. I believe University beat SI earlier in the year, so they are a tough team as well. So they're going to be a good team. And then for girls, you got Urban and University and Marin Academy as the top three teams, I believe. And I think that that's what it's going to look like the rest of the way. We got Urban at 8-1, University's 4-0-3, and Marin Academy's 2-3-1 overall. But none of those teams have lost a match in league yet, and they both are very capable of making a big run. They're very well coached. They're very tactical. So that's what I think is going to happen in those leagues that coming up.
Yeah, before we move on to MCAL, because as we all know, that race over there when it comes to soccer, both sides, boys and girls, is crazy. I want to get some of your predictions. So going back to the WCAL for boys, who do you have winning that league this season?
I think it's going to be Midi. They haven't lost. Well, no, actually, I think it's going to be St. Francis. The reason why I say that for boys is because Midi is a good team, but I saw them lose to Mountain View, or it was not Mountain View. It was Lincoln San Jose that they lost to, and it was a good game. They played well, but I think that type of loss proves that it's going to take a lot for them, I think, to really I mean, they're both great teams, but I do think St. Francis has proven more this year that they can win games that they're supposed to win, and I think that's going to come in huge down the stretch.
And then moving to girls, do you think it will be a St. Francis sweep or Midi or just someone else up from below?
I don't think it's going to be. I think that's honestly, I'm teetering between Midi and St. Francis. Both the girls' teams are incredible. I do think Midi's going to win just because of what they've done in the past, but that could be anyone's game. I think it's definitely going to be between those two teams, but I still think it's a little too early to tell for sure. Until the game tomorrow, I think it's a little too tough to tell who is the clear favorite in that one.
Yeah, be sure to look out. One of us will be at that game for sure tomorrow. That's a must-see matchup. Let's move to the MCAL though real quick, as we got about 2 minutes left before we get to your 10 minutes. So just go through that race as well.
Yeah, so pulling up for the girls, you got Marin Catholic, Branson, Tam, and Redwood as the top three teams that I'm seeing on here. And look, but all three of those teams are great, right? I think that MC and Branson are two tough teams. Branson is a great team, and so is MC. But we can't overlook Tam. They got Marin Jones, who's been a superstar. They got Katie Lowenstein is a superstar. They are a very well coached team. Dave Pressure's a great coach, and they're just such a well coached group. Like I said, we got MC, Branson, and Tam are all 2-0 in that league. Redwood's not far behind, but I do think it's going to ultimately, I think later down the line, I think it's going to come down to Branson and Tam. I think those are the two top teams in that league. And honestly, from what we've seen and all that, I do think Tam has a shot to run away. They are the type of team that can go on a run, and they are in league. I think they're going to end up having a good season there. And then for the boys, you have right now, sitting up looking at the boys, we have Redwood, Tara, Linda, and Tam are the top three. I think that's Redwood's league because Redwood in the past has been a great team, and they still are. So I do believe that while Tam and Redwood are going to be fighting to the end on that, I do think that Redwood is going to come out on top. But I do think that a sleeper team, though, in the boys is MC. Marin Catholic is a pretty good team, and I do believe that they have a chance to turn things around. I know they're 0-2, but they haven't lost a game yet. They faced a pretty tough schedule. So I do think MC is going to be a team to watch, but I do think ultimately that league comes down to Redwood and Tam, with Redwood taking it.
Yeah, Marin County always seems to produce some great races, and those playoffs, when they do come in a couple weeks, will be certainly a must watch. Before we go, you have one more topic, one team that you really impressed you and has jumped into the boys' rankings, and that is Lincoln, just a public
Yes.
school from San Jose that's amongst the monsters of the private schools there. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, the game I was at, it was one of those games where um I didn't really go into it knowing what to expect out of them because I hadn't seen them play. And I kind of figured it was going to be a game like I see a midi team and I'm like, okay, this is going to be an interesting game. But Lincoln played hard. They played really hard all match long. They moved the ball well. They spread the field out. They played a slow game in the sense where they were working the ball around instead of just straight attacking the goal, which is always good at this style, this in high school as a whole, because it just allows the team to really regroup and find open space, and they did a good job of that. And they're a well-coached team. Their coach was really organized with the guys, and I was really impressed to see how much grit and tenacity that they had. Because going into it, you could tell that they knew that people were not expecting them to win, but they came out and they played really hard and they came away with a win. So, down the line, I don't know we'll see what happens with them down the line. They have a tough schedule ahead. I can go over their schedule right now. They're on a 3-match streak, but they have, matched against Lee, Prospect, guys like that. But I really like what I've seen out of them, and I really do believe that they have a chance to win the BVAL Mount Hamilton League because they are currently tied with Westmont in there. So I think that they're going to be a team to watch, and they're going to be a team that's going to surprise a lot of people going forward in CCS.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dylan, our
Yep.
soccer expert this season. You can read all of his stuff on westcoastpreps.com. And until the next episode, we'll see you then. Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
All right, everyone. That is the West Coast Preps Podcast, the first edition of this new era of the West Coast Preps Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure you go subscribe to westcoastpreps.com. Make sure you read all the content of Jack, Chris, and Dylan as they keep on producing great work, as we've produced over 300 stories over the last few months, each and every single month. So thank you so much for being a subscriber. Make sure you click the like button, hit the subscribe button on YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, all of it. Thank you so much for being such a great supporter of West Coast Preps. None of this would happen without you guys, our subscribers. So thank you guys, and until next time,